I trusted him with everything, my heart, my family, my life. But he shattered it all. I lost more than I can ever describe. My home, my peace, my dignity. For years, I walked through life feeling like I had nothing left. I thought the world had turned its back on me. But then, when I had given up hope, justice found a way, and he got exactly what he deserved. I met James when I was full of hope and ambition. He seemed perfect, charming, and trustworthy. Everything I thought I wanted in a partner. We built a life together in Sydney, dreaming of the future. But beneath the smile was a man who thrived on manipulation. Slowly, I started noticing small lies, little betrayals that, at first, seemed trivial. But then, the truth hit like a thunderstorm. He had been betraying me for years, using my trust to ruin my finances and my reputation. I felt like my world had collapsed overnight, but I still remember the first time I truly believed I had found someone who would never hurt me. James was captivating. The kind of man who could light up a room with just a smile, who made you feel like you were the only person in the world that mattered. When we met at that little cafe in Melbourne, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that love could exist without pain, that trust could exist without betrayal. He said the right words, at the right time, with just the right amount of intensity to make me fall. And fall I did, head over heels, without a single thought that this was the beginning of a nightmare disguised as a dream. Our early days were like a movie. Weekend trips to the great ocean road, quiet mornings walking along Street Kilda Beach, laughing over cups of coffee and promises of forever. I let my guard down completely. I shared my deepest fears, my biggest dreams, even the little insecurities I usually kept buried. And James, he seemed to understand me in a way no one else ever had. He listened. He held me when I cried. He reassured me when I doubted myself. It felt like he was my anchor in a stormy world. I couldn't see the storm brewing behind his eyes. But the first tiny crack appeared in the most unexpected way. It was a Friday evening, and I had gone to pick up some groceries. I called James to ask if he needed anything. He sounded distant on the phone, distracted. "I'm fine," he said curtly, with a tone that didn't belong to the man I thought I knew. I shrugged it off. Maybe he was just tired. The signs, at first, were subtle, little lies that seemed harmless. A story that didn't quite add up. A promise forgotten. A phone call he said was work-related but was always late at night. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was imagining things. Then came the day I found out he had lied about something significant. He told me he had sold a car he owned, that the money had gone into savings for our future. I trusted him. I even imagined us buying a house together with that money. Weeks later, I discovered through a mutual friend that the car had never been sold. The money didn't exist. He had used it for something else entirely, something selfish, something I couldn't even comprehend at the time. I confronted him, hoping it was a misunderstanding. He looked at me with a calmness that made my blood run cold. "It's none of your business," he said. Just like that. Nothing else. No apology, no explanation, no hint of guilt. I felt my stomach twist in ways I hadn't known possible. The betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about trust. It was about the person I thought I knew, the man I had shared my heart with, telling me that I wasn't even worthy of the truth. For days, I replayed our conversations, trying to figure out when the man I loved had been replaced by this stranger who could lie with such ease. The more I thought, the more I realized that there had been countless little betrayals before this, each one a tiny chip in the foundation of our relationship, each one unnoticed because I had been blinded by love. I started noticing patterns. He would always have an excuse when I asked about his day. He'd get defensive over the smallest questions. I began finding messages on his phone, texts and emails I wasn't meant to see, messages that hinted at a double life, at connections that had nothing to do with me. My heart sank deeper with each discovery. It was like waking up from a dream, only to realize the person next to you is a stranger who has been pretending all along. The worst part wasn't even the lies. It was the manipulation. Whenever I confronted him, he would twist the situation, making me feel like I was overreacting, like I was the problem. "You're too sensitive," he'd say. You were imagining things again. I began doubting myself, wondering if I was losing my mind. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I knew that someone who loved me wouldn't treat me this way. I knew that betrayal wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern, a choice. I started to withdraw, isolating myself from friends and family because I was embarrassed, ashamed, and confused. How could I have been so blind? How could I have trusted someone so completely, only to be deceived so thoroughly? Every memory of our time together, once warm and comforting, now felt like a trap. Even our shared dreams, once beautiful, seemed like lies crafted to keep me under his control. I felt trapped in a life that wasn't mine, in a relationship that had never been real. Yet, even in the depths of that despair, there was a flicker of anger, a quiet, burning anger that whispered, "You won't destroy me completely. You can lie, cheat, and manipulate, but I won't let you break me entirely." I began to make plans, not yet concrete, but slowly, steadily. I documented every lie, every betrayal, every manipulation. I started to see patterns, to connect dots that I had once ignored. This wasn't just heartbreak. It was a crime against my trust, my dignity, and my future. And I knew that one day, the truth would come out. By the end of that year, I felt like a shadow of myself. The confident, hopeful woman I had once been was gone, replaced by someone cautious, alert, and wary of every smile, every word, every touch. But somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the hurt, I could feel the first seeds of resilience taking root. The betrayal had shaken me to my core, but it hadn't defeated me entirely. I had been blindsided, yes, but I was learning to open my eyes. I was learning that love could be deceptive, that trust could be weaponized, and that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are capable of the deepest betrayals. And in that darkness, I made a silent vow. I would survive. I would find justice, not only for myself but for the part of me that had been destroyed by his lies. I would rebuild my life from the ashes he had left behind. He might have broken me, but he had not won. That chapter of my life had ended. But the story was far from over. The fight for justice had only just begun. After the betrayal, life didn't just feel difficult. It felt impossible. Every morning I woke up with a pit in my stomach, wondering what new disaster James had caused, what lies he had spun, and who else he had manipulated while I was still trying to piece my life together. I remember staring at the ceiling one morning, the sunlight streaming weakly through the blinds, and thinking, how did I get here? How did my life, my happiness, my stability vanish so quickly? It wasn't just heartbreak. It was a collapse of everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and security. The first real blow hit when I checked my bank account. Money I had worked so hard to save for years. Gone. Entire savings wiped out. Not because of a bad investment or some unavoidable circumstance, but because of him. He had managed to manipulate accounts, siphon funds, and leave me completely financially exposed. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor, staring at my empty account, my hands trembling. The walls of our apartment, once a symbol of shared dreams and laughter, now felt like the cage of a nightmare I couldn't escape. I wanted to scream, to call someone, anyone, to tell them what had happened, but I felt shame before anything else. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let someone I loved destroy me so completely? Friends began to notice the change in me. I stopped replying to messages, declined invitations, and withdrew from the world. Even my closest friends didn't fully understand. They didn't know the extent of the manipulation, the financial ruin, the constant fear of waking up to another lie. I became isolated, a shadow of the vibrant woman I once was. Conversations felt like minefields. I was defensive, guarded, and suspicious. I didn't trust anyone, and most of all, I didn't trust myself anymore. The person I had believed I was, the confident, loving, hopeful me, had been eroded day by day, replaced by someone constantly bracing for the next blow. Every day felt like a balancing act between survival and despair. I had to continue going to work, putting on a brave face, acting like everything was fine while inside, I was crumbling. I remember one particular afternoon, sitting in my office at Collins Street, staring blankly at a spreadsheet, tears blurring the numbers. My colleagues joke about mundane things, unaware that my life had been upended by the person I had loved the most. I laughed when I was meant to, nodded when required, and left early under pretense of feeling unwell, only to sit in my car and cry until the tears ran dry. Even everyday tasks became overwhelming. Bills, groceries, laundry. They weren't just chores. They were reminders that I had no support, no safety net, no one to rely on except myself. And yet, even in the suffocating weight of despair, I couldn't stop thinking about him, James, the man who had caused this devastation. Every memory I had of our life together became tainted, a cruel joke. The moments of laughter, the quiet nights cuddled on the couch, the promises we whispered under starlit skies, all of it now felt like lies carefully constructed to entrap me. And then came the emotional manipulation, the kind you don't see until it's too late. James was a master at twisting reality. Whenever I confronted him, he turned it back on me. "You're overreacting," he said. "You don't understand the situation. You're imagining things again." His words, once comforting, now felt like weapons aimed directly at my self-worth. I began doubting my own perception. Was I too sensitive? Was I exaggerating? Had I really been blind to all the signs? The more I questioned myself, the deeper the spiral went. My self-confidence, once a source of pride, eroded until I barely recognized the person I had become. The nights were the worst. Alone in our apartment, the silence was deafening. I would lie awake, replaying every interaction, every smile, every lie, wondering where it had all gone wrong. The betrayal wasn't just about money or lies. It was about my identity, my sense of self. I felt violated, used, and trapped in a life that was never mine. I remember staring at the ceiling, willing sleep to come, begging for a respite from the relentless ache in my chest. But sleep didn't come easily. The mind doesn't rest when it's being torn apart from within. As weeks turned into months, the financial and emotional fallout intensified. I was constantly juggling bills, borrowing money from friends, skipping meals to make ends meet, all while pretending to the world that I had it under control. Each phone call from a bank, each notice of an overdue payment, each reminder of what I had lost felt like a fresh punch to the gut. I was drowning in shame, fear, and anger, but most of all, grief. Grief for the life I had imagined, for the love I had believed in, for the person I thought I was. It wasn't only the practical consequences. It was the psychological toll. Anxiety and depression wrapped around me like chains. I felt trapped in a loop of negative thoughts. You failed. You trusted the wrong person. You're alone. You're weak. Even simple joys, like a walk in the park or a coffee with a friend, felt distant, impossible. I was living in a constant state of alert, expecting disaster around every corner. And yet, amidst the despair, there were flickers of resistance. Small moments when I reminded myself that I was more than his lies. When I found a bill that had been tampered with, I documented it. When I felt a pang of anger, I held on to it as proof that I still had the capacity to feel, to fight, to resist. The fall was painful, brutal, and relentless, but it wasn't absolute. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the exhaustion, the heartbreak, the shame, a spark of determination remained. I didn't know it yet, but that spark would grow. That spark will become my weapon. That spark will become the force that would eventually reclaim my life. But at this point, in the depths of my despair, I could hardly imagine that day. I felt like a shell, a shadow, moving through life without joy, without security, without trust. The world seemed indifferent to my suffering. Friends sympathized but didn't truly understand. Family tried to help but couldn't undo the betrayal. And James, he continued his life as if nothing had happened, a ghost haunting me in every corner of my ruined world. I was broken, yes, but even broken, I had to survive. And survival, I realized, was just the first step. The fall was complete. I had lost almost everything: my finances, my stability, my friends, my self-confidence, and nearly my sense of reality. Every day was a battle against despair, a fight to remind myself that I was still human, still worthy of life, still capable of love and trust. I had been destroyed, yes, but in the ruins of my life, a seed of strength was quietly taking root. One day, I promised myself I would rise again. One day, justice would be served, not just in my broken heart, but for the life that had been stolen from me. Somewhere in the midst of that despair, I realized that waiting for life, or for him, to make things right was a trap. I had lost so much, but I hadn't lost myself entirely. And that flicker of anger, the spark I had felt during my darkest days, started to grow. I decided then and there, I wasn't going to let James control the rest of my life. I wasn't going to let him win. If the world had turned its back on me, I would find a way to stand on my own 2 feet. The first step was gathering the truth. Every lie he had told me, every manipulation, every betrayal, I needed evidence. I began documenting everything. Emails, text messages, financial records, even casual comments he had made that seemed insignificant at the time, suddenly became proof of a carefully orchestrated web of deceit. I printed documents, took screenshots, and kept detailed notes of every interaction. It wasn't just about proving him wrong. It was about reclaiming my voice. For so long, he had dictated my reality. Now, I was starting to take it back. It wasn't easy. Every memory, every document, brought back pain. I'd sit in the small, dimly lit room of my apartment, sifting through files and messages, and I'd feel rage, grief, and despair all at once. Some nights, I couldn't sleep for hours, haunted by the magnitude of what he had done. But gradually, the anger became fuel. The pain became a motivator. I knew that I couldn't allow my suffering to be in vain. I had to fight, not only for justice, but for my own sense of dignity, for the part of me that still believed in fairness, truth, and self-respect. Seeking legal counsel was terrifying at first. I had never imagined myself in a courtroom, fighting against someone I had loved. I feared judgment, humiliation, and failure. But I also knew that I couldn't rely on hope alone. I had to take action. I met with lawyers, explained my story in painstaking detail, and provided them with everything I had meticulously collected. Their advice was straightforward, but powerful. We will hold him accountable. You are not alone in this. Justice is possible. Those words, simple as they were, brought a glimmer of relief, a reminder that I still had allies and that I could fight back. The process was grueling. Each day brought a new challenge, a new form to fill, a new hurdle to overcome. There were moments when I wanted to give up, to say, this is too hard. Maybe it's not worth it. But every time I thought that, I remembered the woman who had been blindsided, the life that had been stolen, the dignity that had been trampled. I reminded myself that fighting back wasn't just for me. It was for the person I had been before he destroyed me, and the person I still had the potential to become. As the legal proceedings unfolded, I felt a mix of fear and empowerment. Facing him, knowing he believed he could intimidate me, was surreal. I could see the arrogance in his eyes, the same arrogance he had worn for years, thinking he was untouchable. But this time, the dynamic had shifted. I had the truth, I had evidence, and I had a support system of professionals and loved ones who believed in me. Each court date, each piece of testimony, each document submitted felt like reclaiming a little more of my life. I also began rebuilding myself emotionally. I sought therapy to untangle the mess of grief, anxiety, and betrayal that had accumulated over months. I joined support groups, sharing my story with women who had faced similar manipulation and deceit. It was healing in a way I hadn't anticipated, realizing I wasn't alone, that my experience wasn't shameful, that my emotions were valid. I was learning to trust myself again, to listen to my intuition, and to recognize my own strength. During this period, I discovered a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. The fall had almost destroyed me, but the fight back was reshaping me. I became meticulous, strategic, and emotionally stronger. I wasn't just surviving. I was actively reclaiming my life. Every action, every document submitted, every legal step forward was a declaration. I am not powerless. I am not defeated. I am rising. By the time the case began to gain momentum, I felt a quiet, steadfast confidence. I wasn't the same person who had been blindsided and isolated. I had transformed into someone who had been tested, hurt, and yet refused to break. The fight back wasn't about vengeance. It was about reclaiming my life, proving that betrayal and cruelty cannot define me, and showing that justice, while delayed, could still be served. Even now, when I reflect on those months of preparation, fear, and emotional labor, I realize something crucial. The fight back was as much about healing as it was about justice. It taught me patience, perseverance, and the value of standing up for myself. It was a moment when despair began to turn into empowerment, and the first clear step toward the life I was determined to rebuild. The day the court proceeding finally began, I felt a knot in my stomach that wouldn't loosen. Walking into that room, I could see James sitting there, his usual smug expression plastered across his face, like he was untouchable. But this time, the power dynamic had shifted. I wasn't the frightened, isolated woman he had manipulated for months. I was prepared, armed with evidence, and supported by people who believed in me. As the hearings unfolded, each lie he had spun over the years was laid bare, exposed for everyone to see. Emails, messages, financial records. It all painted a picture of deceit and manipulation too blatant to ignore. For the first time, I could feel the weight of my fear and anger lifting, replaced by a fierce sense of empowerment. Every time he tried to deflect or intimidate, the truth hit harder, and I realized that years of pain and betrayal were finally coming to light. Sitting there, I could see the shock in his eyes as the evidence mounted. The arrogance that had once terrified me now crumbled under the undeniable reality of his actions. And in that moment, I felt a rush of relief and quiet satisfaction. Not vengeance, not hatred, but justice. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly reclaiming my life, one truth at a time. When the verdict finally came, I felt a wave of relief unlike anything I had experienced in years. It wasn't explosive joy or triumph. It was calm, steady, a deep sense of closure. James had to face the consequences of every lie, every betrayal, every act that had torn my life apart. Sitting in that courtroom, listening to the judge's words, I felt years of pain, fear, and anger slowly being lifted from my shoulders. It was justice, plain and simple, and I had fought tooth and nail to reach it. But what mattered even more than the verdict was what came after. I started rebuilding my life piece by piece. I reconnected with friends I had pushed away, leaned on family for support, and found strength in the small victories, paying off debts, moving into my own home, and reclaiming my independence. Every day was a reminder that I was no longer defined by the betrayal I had endured, but by the resilience I had shown. I also began healing emotionally. Therapy, self-reflection, and new experiences helped me rediscover joy, trust, and self-worth. I learned that forgiveness wasn't for him. It was for me to let go of the chains of anger and pain. I could finally breathe, walk freely, and embrace life without the weight of fear. Looking back, I realized that he may have destroyed a chapter of my life, but he never destroyed me. Justice had been served in the courtroom, yes, but the real justice was in reclaiming my